They should have said the poet. The poet. They should have said the poet. The poet.
This is Sending Poets, a podcast about ideas. Our goal is to understand metaphorical truths within the beauty we find in the human experience. Sending Poets. You know, at some point, the dreaming just has to start happening, my man. There's a haiku I wrote about dreams at some point in the past. I should have wrote down the date. I wrote that. Anyway, my name is John. With me is Bob and Tucker. What's up, you guys?
Hey, good morning.
We're going to continue our conversation on sleep. I think we're going to try to focus maybe a little more on dreams this time. So I believe the last episode we left off with the idea or this, it was either the Picasso quote or the Lord Byron poem that is referenced in the Inner Cosmos podcast. I think it must have been the Picasso quote maybe, but I think let's start with this Lord Byron poem here. And we'll just see what happens here. So sleep hath its own world and a wide realm of wild reality, and dreams in their development have breath and tears and tortures and the touch of joy. They leave a weight upon our waking thoughts. Ooh.
It's true.
So yeah, this reality that we hallucinate when we're dreaming, they leave a weight upon our waking thoughts. So immediately I'm thinking about, I don't know if you guys can relate, but I've had multiple times in my life where something in my dream, the storyline is one that is like pissing me off. I'm aggravated. I definitely have memories where in the dream I'm like screaming, just so furious, just it's like the angriest I've ever been, and it like there's this like cathartic, visceral thing of just being able to just unleash how pissed off I am. and then waking up and like sometimes I feel like my whole day is gonna be ruined now. I'm like so fucking like still angry from this made up thing that wasn't real, but it felt real, you know, and I just kind of woke up out of it. So I've had those.
Can I connect some dots here already? I think
Yeah,
this is
for sure.
such a perfect start. I'll tell you why. What if the anger is, well, we would agree, I would assume, anger is an emotion. And what if the emotion is from your subconscious? And what if there's some kind of informational content in that emotion? It might be misguided, but let's just say it's powerful, right? It's sticking with you. Reminds me of this Carl Jung quote that I read recently, and I apologize for not sharing it with you guys earlier, but let me read this. I'm not going to be as good of a read as John's, but I apologize.
No, you're good, man.
Carl Jung. We are so captivated by and entangled in our subjective consciousness that we have forgotten the age-old fact that God speaks chiefly through dreams and visions.
Wow.
Yeah. I don't know why.
And I don't know if these are the dots you were connecting, but they just connected, you know, and in that quote, I don't know that I necessarily think God is like the Christian God or
No.
I think it's like
Exactly.
the subconscious thing, like the bits
What I think
the bits that we're like that we're giving to ourselves.
Yes,
you know?
yes, but imagine before all of our history, before there was written history, before oral history, before the dominance of humanity and technology and, us strutting around as the top of the pyramid.
Hmm.
Think about how we were so captivated and entangled in our subjective consciousness that what we would call God, metaphorically speaking, right? The metaphorical God, the source, the first mover, the reason why is
The
this happening?
creator.
Yes,
Yeah.
well, it's the answer to a question that only an intelligent creature would ask. Meaning, it's a nonsensical question. It has nothing to do with anything sense. Has to do with what happened before this cause. Like, because everything has a cause. So if we track back, like in our moment of time, meaning your subjective moment of time, your ability to be alive in a tribe or a city or an individual, whatever your thing is, we don't have proof, but something happened before you were born. Like, we can kind of assume it did. It seems like reasonable that I was born and the whole world didn't start with me. But my existence, my subjective existence did start with me. But I have to take upon a leap of faith that something happened that caused me, and I will cause somebody else, and someone before me there had a cause, and all the way back. And my point is, the dreams and the visions are what program or interact with your subconscious and conscious. So that is like this point of mesh or merger. It's an amalgam.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you have, so go back to what you were talking about. You had this dream and you were screaming at somebody or something, and irrelevant to your waking day. It had nothing. It was no reality to it.
Mm-hmm.
But you woke up angry.
Right.
And so imagine how much of past human endeavors before we had, like I said, written history and technology and documentation and all these things that we can point to as this is the truth. This is objective. This is real. This is what's actually happening. Before that, everything was just bullshit. Right? Why does this giant ball of light go across the sky and then it gets dark? Well, I'm sure there were countless explanations for this thing.
Right. You have stories, It's
Yeah.
a god.
It's
A god makes that happen.
And I apologize to the listener because this came up in our pre-show discussion about what if there's words you could learn that would completely change who you are and how you viewed the world. And think about this, prior to language developing, there was no way to describe that there was history before you were born and that there will be events that occur after you die. There was no way to quantify that. There was no way to describe it.
This is
from your point of view, your whole universe, the whole universe started at your birth and ended at your death.
Yeah.
And that's all you knew.
But imagine this, guys. This is this transitionary period from, say, a quote unquote animal to a quote unquote human, which is somehow qualitatively different than an animal.
Consciousness, right? Maybe.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. So, but it's like this liaison between being a conscious animal, meaning like what we were talking about before, orca, or an elephant, or some kind, a chimpanzee, something that is approximate to human level intelligence and has language and has a consciousness, subconsciousness layer, something like that, right? It has culture, passes down abstraction and information from one generation to the next. But before we're actually making tech and, like to Tucker's point, having words to describe more and more things, that bridge point is visions, like daydreams, and actual dreams. And then the feeling that you get, because let's just say deer walking in the forest, they would, I'm presuming now, maybe I'm wrong, but let's just say they're not fully conscious. They don't have a abstraction layer of language that they consciously are considering their next actions. presumably they're deciding to go left or right or stop or start based on a feeling. Or if there's no feeling, some external stimulus, like a wolf howls behind them and they start running forward, right? Or whatever, but they're not contemplating the future nor the past, right, Tucker? That's the point. They're
Yeah.
not contemplating the history of things. They don't have words for the history of things.
Mm.
They don't have a concept of the history of things. So they're kind of stuck in this subconscious layer where we don't have to go into the definitions once again, but imagine the subconscious is driving. It's the Marge. Back to the Simpsons reference. The subconscious is driving, but they don't really need a Maggie just yet. They don't really need to pretend they're driving just yet. That pretend layer comes upon the subconscious layer with the abstraction of language. Like that's the first thing you have to have. You have to have some way to differentiate a momentary feeling, because you're feeling, John, about seeing a sunrise, or you're feeling, Tucker, about seeing a rainbow, is probably close to mine, but I will never know. I can't know exactly what your feeling is. I don't know what your color red looks like. I don't know what your sense of sweetness tastes like. But we have words that we can kind of approximate just to get an understanding that, what, there's a theory of mind going on. I know what's inside me, and you're telling me what's inside you, and we cannot experience each other,
Mm-hmm.
but we can approximate with this layer of abstraction we call language.
Yeah.
And so back to the beginning, the pertinent nature of dreams and visions and feelings is to kind of understand where we came from, going back to Eden, right? The last episode we were talking about
Yeah.
Sleep Token song. And so I think that is key, is just before we go forward, meaning as a human species, because we're going forward so fast, guys. We're going forward so fast. Things are changing so quickly.
Right.
You go from 1900 to 1969. You go from first powered flight to men on the moon,
Mm-hmm.
and just it's going faster and faster every day, faster and faster. That we're bypassing, in my humble opinion, we're bypassing any recognition of ancestors that did not have this layer of abstraction. So we're kind of caught up in it, is my point. We're kind of caught up in the abstraction at this point, and we're losing track of the feeling side or the vision side or the dream side.
Yeah,
interesting.
I would agree with that.
What was the last part of the Jung quote? We forget that the dreams are messages.
Yeah, let me read it one more time here. We are so captivated by and entangled in our subjective consciousness that we have forgotten the age-old fact that God speaks chiefly through dreams and visions. Okay, we forgot the fact.
Age-old fact.
Correct.
Even,
So this goes back to, we talked about this on the pod, I think, the concept of the metaphorical Trinity plus the devil kind of a thing. So what is, my concept of God is the question, who is God? Okay, it's this moment of awakening past our sense-based descriptors. So we have language. Let's say the orca have language, and they have language for the kind of food they eat, and they have language for the names of their pod mates, and they have a language for their pod versus the pods around them, and maybe they have language for where they are in the world. Maybe are they on the Pacific Ocean side, Atlantic Ocean side, etc. Maybe elephants have words for their deceased. Maybe they have words for where the water hole is or where forage is or whatever. They have all these words. I'm saying humanity is words for nonsense. Words for things that don't exist nonsensically.
Yeah, outside of sensory, like truly, like by saying nonsense outside of sensory.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah, exactly.
but outside of like sensory perception.
That's my point, John.
Subjective sensory perception, I would say, I guess, right?
Well, I think all sensory perception is subjective. So yes, but my point is to think of a creator is to think of something outside of the realm of sense. Because let's just categorically say there is no creator, and if there is, it, he, she, them are not inside our environment, meaning we could be inside a jar and the creator's outside the jar.
Mm-hmm.
So there might be a creator to the jar that we're inside of, but we can't physically go there or presumably touch it or see it or smell it or taste it or feel it or whatever. We can't do that, let's say. So we being humanity, find this watch on the beach. Classic example, right? You find a watch on the beach. You open up this watch. It's got all these fine-tuned mechanisms, these cogs and wheels, and it's keeping time, and it's beautiful, and it looks like doesn't look like anything else on the beach. It doesn't look like a random rock or a coconut or a crab shell or whatever. It looks something special, super special. You got to think, well, nothing else is like this. Nothing else just works beautifully like this, other than things that people make. So how is this thing out here? How is this thing out here other than somebody made it? And so that's my point, is building language in from these dreams and visions, that is, quote unquote, God, meaning this inspiration level of things that are unseen. Because the dreams and their visions are not created by sensation. They're created inside of us to simulate or emulate sensation. Going back to a podcast we referenced quite a bit, David Eagleman's, the visual cortex is 95% processing, 5% actual signal from the retina.
Right.
So it's indistinguishable to us in dream state that is not literally just when we look around. We look around, we think we're seeing things, by the way. We think we're not really. I mean,
our actual eyes are closed.
Well, let me put it this way. We do see things, but our experience of seeing things is what we know and remember. Going back to John, what was that thing with the blindsided monkey? So there was a monkey. Can't remember the name of the guy who did this experiment. It was a British guy, I think, back in the 70s or 80s. They took out the monkey's visual cortex. They went into its brain. They literally removed it, but they didn't touch its eyes. And this monkey acted blind, and they thought the monkey was blind until one day, one researcher was holding out a piece of food or a treat or something, and the monkey grabbed it. Do you remember this, John?
Yeah, I think it was, the monkey's name was Helen, right? And I think it was,
the monkey's name was
yeah,
Helen.
I think the guy's name was Larry Lawrence Weiskrantz.
You recall? I cannot recall that.
No, I googled it. No, I googled it.
Oh,
just now.
You son of a bitch.
Yeah,
Well,
no, my memory is not that good.
I was gonna say,
but yeah.
But here's the point that I thought was so fascinating. It's not just that because the monkey could smell the food or whatever. Here's the point. The scientists realize something's afoot here, and they create a obstacle course, as it were. And this monkey is blind as shit, meaning it literally does not have a visual cortex. It cannot consciously observe anything. But the monkey was able to navigate an obstacle course. But it failed to do so. She failed to do so if she what? Do you remember, John?
Was it blindfolded?
Blindfolded, right?
No.
Oh.
When she became, I'm sure that's true as well, but no, that was not the experiment. When she became emotionally excited, something happened that would trigger her excitable. Like if she was calm and she could just kind of, go through the motions, she would avoid the obstacles, avoid the pitfalls, get the reward at the end, and just be happy-go-lucky. But she couldn't do it if she was stressed or if she was in like an emotional torment.
Excited state or something.
Excited state. So here's what I'm getting back to the Jung quote. We're getting these visions all the time that provide information to our subconscious, to our subjective consciousness. Okay, so our subjective consciousness is interpreting these feelings, these visions, these dreams constantly. And we take for granted that we're actually seeing what we're seeing. And we do, by the way. I think our most of our vision matches up with the reality underlying it, but it's not necessarily so. If anybody's ever gone on ayahuasca or shrooms or, LSD or whatever, I'm sure there's a consensus that things start to break down and there's a division between reality and perception of reality. you know,
Mhm.
like things start to happen that are unexplainable, and then they come back.
Mhm.
Once your trip is over, they usually come back. So the point is the ability to be in a dream state and have it be so lifelike that it is fooling us every night, and recurringly so. Every night is, why don't you realize you're dreaming? We can get into lucid dreaming, obviously, but my point is most of us fall into the trap every single night, where
Right.
once we start dreaming, we just go with it. We don't know any better, but the thing is indistinguishable from reality. So
Yeah.
anyway, the point being, how much of our informational decision making, how much of our free will is being fed to us through this subconscious process
Right.
of dreams and visions and feelings that we interpret. Why am I angry? Well, this thing bit me. That's why I'm angry. So I'm just going to bite it back.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't really know. I don't really know why I'm angry.
Yeah.
I just feel like I'm angry, and so I'm going to fight right now.
Another part that ties in all this stuff with lucid dreaming specifically is in that third episode of Inner Cosmos when he's interviewing the lucid dream researcher. This guy was sharing how lucid dreaming could maybe be helpful with like PTSD treatment, and he shared this example of a lucid dream he had, where like somebody busted into his house, like a guy came in to like rob him, busted into his house, and he recognized in the moment, like, protect his family. He knew he was lucid dreaming. Like this was happening, but in his lucid dream that he knew he was dreaming, and he realized like he could turn into like the Hulk and just like smash this guy, like punch him and literally like launch him into the stratosphere because it was his dream. He could do this, but he didn't do that. Instead, he recognized like this robber is part of himself. This is his dream. Everything that's happening is part of his own subconscious, right? His own strange repeating loops. And so he approached it was like basically like, why are you here? What message do you have for me? And I thought that was really cool. I wrote a haiku. It goes, even in nightmares, there is something to learn from. After all, they're us.
Nice.
I like
I
it.
like that. That's a
And
good one.
thank you. And I also thought, what if there was some way that if I did get really good at lucid dreaming, what if, because there is sort of like maybe a mind over matter thing maybe here. What if I could use lucid dreaming to control my triglyceride level? You know what I mean?
Well, wasn't that one of the points of experimentation with lucid dreaming? Is what happens if you take a bunch of alcohol or a drug or something? What, like,
Yes.
I thought that was fascinating. With
Yes. So, because it was, and he phrased it, it's like placebo without deception is how he framed
yeah,
that up.
yeah,
So, like, placebo effect is like intentional deception, the experimenters. And I do think, like, as I understand it, the double blind thing, it's pretty well structured scientifically to really try to eliminate as much bias from the experiment as possible, but this is a proven thing that placebo effect is real, but in the context of the placebo effect that we know, it's deception, right? Like there is intentional, like somebody thinks they're going to be getting this drug, but they're not. It's just like a sugar pill or whatever.
but
You know what I
there are
mean?
limits. There are limits. Like if you have placebo effect, but you have an amputated hand, good luck. Because that's not gonna. You're not gonna be able to self-generate your hand, but like controlling your own blood pressure or
Sure. Yeah.
so I think there are limits to that, but I find it
Yeah.
interesting of doing it intentionally. But didn't he
In
say
a
like,
dream. Yeah. So
yeah,
yeah, if I can just like, let me just kind of like remember here. I think the experiment was actually, we should probably just set up this researcher. I mean, it sounds like, and it's not just his group. I remember he referenced other places, like in the Netherlands, I think does lucid dream research, maybe France, some places in Europe, I'm sure, at least a couple other places. So it's not just, a single group that's doing this, but there's a method where, people that have become really good at lucid dreaming participate in these studies, and they attach sensors around their eyes. And I know there was a acronym like occipital sensory something or other. But it was basically these, super sensitive sensors that were, measuring eye movements, because that seems to be the telltale, like when you're lucid dreaming, your eyes are moving, REM sleep, rapid eye movement, right? That whole thing, right? And so the science has gotten to the point where these sensors can tell like the person's dreaming. And so as that as a baseline, some of these experiments, it's so fascinating. They when the the external people researching can see from these um, muscle movements, that some lucid dreaming is happening. But the point where the lucid dreamer signals to the researchers, hey, I'm in my lucid dream now, I know I'm dreaming, it was very consistent, like look left, look right, look left, look right. So it was a very clear signal, like, hey, they're here. And they do things like, okay, so they're dreaming. They would tell them math problems. Do you guys remember this? They'd go like, what's 4 minus 7? And so the answer would be 3. I mean, I said 4 minus 7. That's funny. 7 minus 4. The answer's 3. So they would look to the left 3 times. So they've developed this way to communicate with the dreamer. So that's just fascinating. And to the point where like I can believe that this works for them. They found this way to do this. So bringing this back to the consuming mind-altering substances. So they ran some experiments where in the dream somebody would drink alcohol. I don't know if they maybe smoked weed, ate mushrooms, acid, but they did something. And the fascinating thing was the brain was responding just like as if they had actually taken those substances. The same parts of the brains were lighting up. Like, dude, that's so fascinating, right? I mean, just like
subjectively, they were under the influence.
As far as the brain, was behaving, right? It seemed to indicate that the brain thought, oh yeah, and I don't know if they went so far as like, okay, here's a lucid dreamer that's never had a drink of alcohol.
That's
drink
what
drink alcohol in the dream. I don't know if they that intuitively, I would assume the brain would not light up, right? I don't know for sure, but it seems logical, I guess, to draw a conclusion. Well, I guess this would be not a conclusion, this would be a hypothesis. I guess the hypothesis would be that if you had a reference for that, if your brain had a reference for what it's like to drink alcohol or smoke weed or eat acid or whatever, and you do that in the dream, your brain thinks it's really happening and it's lighting up in the same way. That's what I gathered from that,
Yeah, that would make sense to me.
What about, do you guys remember there was another kind of test of tracking the finger with your eyes? So if you track something, like your eyes jump point to point to point to point to point. Do you guys remember this? Where if you were to look left, look right, your eyes really jump, like little jumps at a time.
Oh yeah,
but if you track something, like look at the tip of a finger, you get like a smooth track.
Right.
So they did like, imagine you're looking at a finger, and it would still, because they have these ocular sensors on, these it's like a EKG for your eyes or something like that.
Yeah, right.
But I believe if you were to try to imagine it, it would still jump. But if you did it in a dream, it would be back to smooth. Am I right about that? Is that the right way?
Yeah, that sounds very very familiar. That there was something about
like you can't really trick yourself when you're just trying to do it. Like you're when you're consciously trying to do it, when you're consciously trying to recreate this thing, even with like your eyes closed or something, you're still jumping point to point to point. But in a dream state, I believe if it happens, it is now back
smooth,
to
right? It wasn't jumping. Yeah.
And it's like, this is why it's so interesting to me. This is not something you can fake. This is not something that's under your conscious control that you get to pick and choose. It's like it's almost like a reflex or an involuntary action.
Mm.
But back to like the brain lighting up with intoxication signals. It's like you really can't fake that, and back to, I don't know if you guys remember that very first story of the guy who committed a murder on his in-laws while he
Hmm.
was sleepwalking.
Sleepwalking. Yeah.
Yeah, where when they hooked him up in a sleep study after the fact to test his claims, it was actually happening. He was doing whatever, I can't recall exactly, but his dream and wake sleep cycles were vastly different from a quote unquote typical person,
Right.
and that is not something you can fake.
Yeah. It's pretty interesting that the another point that was made in that section of the episode was about I can't remember now if they said it this way or if it's just how I wrote it, but so the researcher, I think he was sort of his mentor was this guy Stephen LeBerge, and I think he was one of the first guys to really get into lucid dream research, maybe in the 80s, I think. And he was talking about it as like prompt engineering. Like that term itself means a lot these days because of AI, it's like Chat GPT. It's like depending on who you talk to, a lot of people are saying like it's a tool, and really it's like the way to learn the tool is to learn these skills of prompt engineering. You know what I mean? It's like if you put garbage into it, you're going to get garbage out. But if you put a really eloquent, prompt, and the language you put into it, right, is precise and clear and detailed, you'll get something very nice and precise and clear and detailed as the output. And this guy was suggesting it as like prompt engineering for lucid dreaming. And the quote that I put here is that this guy Stephen LeBerge talked about like using his dreams to he said, show me the best version of myself. And I
Yeah.
love that idea too, that like if
Now I
we could,
remember. Now I remember. It was
yeah,
John. It was. I think it was like called the. Because they're trying to trigger lucid dreaming, and one of the ways was like you wake up in the middle of the night, like you intentionally set your alarm to wake you up at like 4 a.m. or whatever, maybe 2 a.m, whatever it was, and then you're supposed to be awake for like 15, 30 minutes, and then try to program yourself with what it is you want to dream about, like very intentionally, and then go back to bed. It's like the back to bed method or something like that, right? Do you guys remember that?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah, that was one of
And I
the
think,
things that they said really helps. Like dream journal first. I feel like I've always heard that like that's one of the first steps. And I did start one, but I haven't got into it every day. I started it, and then 2 weeks later I was like, oh yeah, shit, I started this. But I'm trying to like get more into that. But yeah, aside from the dream journal, it's like, yeah, intentionally wake yourself up after you. I think it's still got to be a guessing type of thing. Like you're not trying to wake yourself up during REM sleep, but you're hoping to wake yourself up
well, it's like
after
when you go
you go
back
through a
to sleep.
cycle.
Yeah, because what you want is when you go back to sleep, the REM cycle starts up almost immediately. I think
Yeah,
that's the
with that
point. So,
intent of like I'm gonna go into this dream.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
show me my best self and stuff like that. Real
Yeah,
quick, this just reminded me. I had a dream recently,
yeah,
and
yeah.
so my take home message, without getting into specifics, because quite frankly I forgot the specifics. I feel guilty now because it sounds like just I'm making shit up. But um, I had a dream, and somebody showed me something written down, and it was precisely written down. It wasn't bullshit. It wasn't garbage. It wasn't like squiggly lines like a fake
Mm.
cartoon newspaper or something like that. It was actually written down. And I do recall this because when I woke, I was like in amazement. Like I actually remember seeing something written down, because didn't we have this conversation, or it was on the excuse me, the Eagleman podcast, about one of the many things that don't show up for real in the dream state is like your if you have an analog watch, or you write things
Or
written
even
down.
like digital clock. Yeah, like digital clock,
Digital
like
clock,
text,
text.
fingers.
Thank you. Yeah,
Fingers. I mean, very very similar to like how AI struggles with doing these things. It's very
exactly.
bizarre that there's this coincidence. But yeah, yeah, yeah. Keep
But
going.
there was my take home message is I was just when I woke up, I just remember distinctly, because I don't remember my dreams very often, hardly at all. But I remember distinctly, like I was like, whoa, I saw text. Like I don't
Like
remember.
clear. Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
so clear that I saw something written down. I don't even remember in the context. I hate to be like that, but it could have been a blackboard or someone handed me a piece of paper or whatever. So it could all just be a figment of my imagination, is what I'm saying. But I believe, subjectively, I believe
Yeah.
that I saw text in a dream that did make sense.
Yeah. Next time it happens, like write it down after you wake up.
I
Just try
totally
to
could.
remember, because that's the thing is like while you're trying to write it down, that's the fun part. Or I don't know why I said fun. I'm sure it can be fun, but also maybe scary because like it starts to, I think, starts to disappear when you really start. It's almost like maybe observer effect kind of a thing. Like it's there, but when you really start to like think about it and write it down, it starts to like vanish from your like what was it? Ah shit. Ah,
Totally.
there it's gone.
It's gone so
And
quick.
going back to the dreams being, the gods or whatever speaking to you, there have been famous songs. I know Keith Richards is one of them, and I forget the specific song, but he dreamt the melody. He woke
Yesterday,
up,
Paul McCartney, I think.
yeah,
Well, for
dreamt
sure
the
that one,
melody,
yeah.
woke up, wrote it down, went back to bed, and then built a song out of it.
Yeah.
And I forget the scientist, but there was one scientist, similar thing, had some revolutionary thought in a dream,
Benzene.
woke up, wrote it down, built a theory out of it in waking life.
Yeah, it was the chemical structure of benzene, and
No
it
kidding.
was a snake eating its own tail
Nice.
in a dream.
Mm,
And
that does sound familiar.
what's so fascinating is he had the first night's dream, and this thing happened, and then he forgot it. Like, but just like me telling you, I remember seeing text. Like he remembered he did it. He remembered it happened. But he couldn't remember because he never wrote it down, or he couldn't read his handwriting or whatever. So it wasn't until the next night he had a recurring dream, the same thing. Then he got up. I believe he went into his laboratory and either wrote the experiment or actually did the experiment right then to test the hypothesis of how the benzene is like it's a ring structure or something, like so a snake eating its own tail. Anyway,
Wow.
I 100% think that's possible.
Sure,
But
sure.
I
Well,
do
let
want
us
to jump
not.
off.
I would say one more. Let's not forget the famous Doc Brown. I mean, that's how he came up with the flux capacitor. Hello. Anyway, yeah.
Nice. I like that. What I was going to ask you guys is, I think we talked about what is the purpose of sleep in the past, but I don't know if we've ever gone on record, each of us around the horn. What do you think the purpose of dreams are?
Well, I love the question, and I also know, like Tucker, you mentioned you had a dream. Um, did you say it was like a lucid dream? Because I kind of want to stay on lucid dream maybe for a little bit more, because I have one that I share, and
I
then I'd
would
like
I would
to.
say it definitely had the aspect of lucidity and the fact that I knew it was a dream. So we stayed in a hotel in Denver Friday night, and I never sleep that great in hotel rooms because there's an air conditioner kicking on and off, and there's other noises. It's not your typical environment. I don't think your body relaxes the same way.
If you're used to sleeping in the same bed
Yeah,
over and over, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, for sure, for
So I
sure.
had this dream that, like, I'm in bed in the hotel where I'm at, and this lady walks in the door, and she, like, I could hear her talking to somebody outside the door, like, I can't clean this room. There's people in it.
Hmm.
And I kind of sat up in the bed and I was like, you can't be in here because I know I latched like the security latch on the door. Like there's no way you could be
Yeah.
in here. And she's like, you're right. And then the dream ended.
Wow.
That's crazy.
That's so that's so interesting. Okay, so I have two dreams to share now because I had a similar dream when I was in Cleveland for work. I didn't tell you guys this, but the hotel we stayed at, um, they were affected by the CrowdStrike thing, and the way they were affected though is it like hosed their door key system. I think they're pretty much all on mobile keys right now, and none of that worked. So the only way anyone could get into their room was to be escorted by an employee because the employees were the only ones that could open the doors.
Oh, brutal.
So and we got there on a Monday, and it started happening Friday when the CrowdStrike thing happened. And when I left on Friday, it hadn't been fixed yet. So it was like a gnarly week plus of these, and they were like, one person seemed kind of grumpy about it, but everybody else was like, man, whatever, it is what it is. And it, like kudos to them for like making lemonade out of lemons and stuff. But the point was, we kind of talked like nobody was really like asking for IDs. One time I got asked for an ID, but everywhere else was just like, which room is it? Here you go. And I remember kind of thinking like, what if somebody forgets their room? I had to keep pulling out my little card. What room number is it again, right? What if I accidentally gave them the wrong number? So one of the nights I had a dream that they let me into the room and other people were in there. And it was like in the dream, it was like, oh, this wasn't the first time. It's like, you guys again? You guys are in my room again? And they were like, well, when are you staying? I'm like, I'm only here another couple of days. They're like, well, we're here for a while. Can we just stay the whole time? I was like, yeah, I guess. And there was only one bed. And it was like, it was kind of making sense in my dream that like, I guess you guys can have the bed. And like, it was like a couple, I think. And they were like sleeping. And I'm like, well, I guess I'll sit here or whatever. I don't know. It was weird. But I don't think that was a lucid dream. I didn't know I was dreaming. It was one of those things that everything made sense, but I didn't know I was dreaming.
What's
But
so interesting to me, real quick, is that both of you were in a hotel room dreaming
yeah,
about being in a hotel room.
yeah, I know, right? I know. I wasn't planning to share that, but as soon as you said, Tucker, about like the hotel thing, it just reminded me, like, oh yeah. But in the same way that you had a moment where you knew this isn't possible, that the last time I had a lucid dream, and not that I've had a ton, but I know I've had some when I was younger, but this was like 4 years ago, maybe ish. It was after COVID, so less than 4 years ago, I think. Anyway, we were staying at my sister-in-law's house in Florida, and so yeah, same kind of thing. I wasn't sleeping in the bed I'm usually used to sleeping in. Whether that was a factor or not, I don't know. Probably a coincidence. But the point is, in my dream, I met up with these people, Jim and Janine, that owned the Papa Murphy's that Kim and I worked at, where we met and everything. And I adore these people. They were fantastic leaders. You know what I mean? I really learned a ton from them. Amazing people, Jim and Janine. And Jim, we hadn't really lost touch because stayed in touch because of Facebook. They moved to Oregon many years ago, but stayed in touch. And I knew that years before Jim had a stroke or two. I knew he was like bound to a wheelchair. He could still navigate, he could still drive the wheelchair on his own, but he couldn't walk. He was in a wheelchair. And in my dream, he was walking. And just like you said, Tucker, I was like, this isn't real. I was like, you can't walk. I know that you're not able to walk. I know that this isn't real. This is a dream. And I did like take control, and I did like launch off of the ground and was flying. It was fucking awesome. I totally like experienced, like, I know I'm dreaming. I know like I can do whatever I want. I can fly. And what was cool is like that happened, I think shortly after that I woke up. It's like in the middle of the night, I'm like, oh yeah, okay. And then I fell back asleep and I totally forgot about it. It was like hours after we had woken up, we were starting to go somewhere or something. And just out of nowhere, I was like, oh my God, you guys, I just remembered I had this dream. And it was so cool to like remember in that moment. And if I hadn't have said it out loud, if I would have tried to just think through and try to remember it, maybe I would have forgotten some details, because in that moment I was like, I have to say this, I have to get this out, like what I just remembered, that I had this lucid dream and shared it. And so I do think that helped, by the way, because I've retold that story like 3 or 4 times since, and it's reinforcing my memory of it, I suppose, hopefully.
Well, note to all listeners, real quick, note to all listeners, if you think you're in a dream and you want to test the flight game, launch off the ground. Do not climb a building. Do not jump off the top of a
yeah. It's not like Matrix Resurrections. Yeah. It's not like Matrix Resurrections. I fly or I fall, and you step off of a building. And exactly. No, yeah. Launch off the ground. Yeah, for sure. Just like Matrix Resurrections, he does that. Can you still fly? I don't know. Let me try. And he's like, no, that's not happening. Anyway.
Well, yeah, I mean, so the crazy thing to me about dreams is I'd love for them to study the same type of thing with the drug and alcohol study. Like, what happens to the brain when somebody gets shot in a dream? Or is attacked by an animal in a dream? Like, does it light the brain up that same way? But I don't know that we necessarily have a baseline for what happens to the brain when somebody is actually shot to compare that to. But I remember being a very young child and having a traumatic dream about being shot that was very real and disturbed me upon waking. And it's like, I'd love to know what actually happens to the brain in those instances.
Now that you say that, it triggers a thought that, So my dad, he had a couple strokes right before he died, and one of the strokes, the one before the big one, it damaged the part of his brain that allows you to create words. So he had something called aphasia, and so he would be like normal. He would just be like normal looking, and he could walk and do things, and he could, if you told him pick up a banana, he would pick up the banana and all this stuff. But he couldn't find the words for things. He couldn't speak clearly, and he couldn't make things happen. So I wonder, what would it be like to be able to monitor a dream state of someone who like has problems with their ability to make words?
Hmm.
Yeah, would they lose that in their dream state as well?
Exactly. I think it's a fascinating concept.
Yeah, totally. Well, let's go back to your question, Bobby. You said like, what do we think the purpose of dreaming? You said sleeping slash dreaming, but I think dreaming that we want to like
Yeah, I think
start
we
with.
went over. Yeah, I think we went over like, hey, why do we sleep? Is it to consolidate, information? Is it to delete erroneous information? Is it to just conserve energy because it's nighttime? And right, there was
Hmm.
a bunch of things, like a list that Eagleman went through of these, you know, no one really knows, obviously, but these concepts. But what about dreaming specifically? Not sleeping. But what do we think, if anything, or maybe it's nothing? Maybe it's just like, just well, he brought up visual cortex, right? Keeping your visual cortex from being repurposed for other means. Meaning, within, I believe his reference was, if you put a blindfold on somebody, within an hour, you can detect the neurons in their visual cortex being repurposed for other
Yeah,
other.
I remember that. Yeah, that was very interesting. That it was yeah. If we didn't dream, maybe um maybe our
Our
yeah our
brain would
visual cortex would
rewire. Things would start
yeah.
rewiring, because if you're a blind person, now your visual cortex is repurposed for something else. And I believe also they mentioned, in a dream state, for someone who's, let's just say, been blind from birth, have never had sight, their dream is, it feels like feeling. It's sound, and it's feeling things. So they don't suddenly dream with visuals, right? They're dreaming with whatever has taken over their visual cortex of their
Mm,
brain. Like
yeah,
whatever that purpose is now, that's what their dream. It's about the texture of things or whatever, and
yeah.
sound. So what do you guys think? If you do, you each have a concept? Do you have an idea of what you think?
Well, I have an idea. I won't say this is a belief, but it's something that's kind of formed this morning that ties in with some of the other stuff we've talked about. And so I'll take it from the our dreams trying to teach us something perspective. And we've talked about how I think there's some sort of ancestral memory, something being passed on in DNA that almost like instinct. Um, there's something passed on that from your ancestors, things they have experienced that you just have kind of an instinctual knowledge of. And so if you take it from a perspective like, okay, I was shot in a dream and I felt it. I knew what it felt like. Now, clearly, you've never been shot. You've never experienced that, but you experienced it in a dream. So there's two things that could be happening here. Like either one of your ancestors was shot and survived it, and that feeling was somehow passed on in your DNA, that you instinctually, your brain knows how that feels. Or it could be the fact that, not the fact, the idea that what if our consciousness is more of a radio transmitter receiver,
Hmm.
and that person was shot and didn't survive it, but that radio signal was still sent back out. And
Yeah.
so, from wherever you're pulling that radio signal from as your consciousness, still was able to pick up that signal, even though it was never passed on in DNA.
I love the ideas that they tie in with that Andy Weir's short story, The Egg. Because um, genetically passed on through DNA, maybe radio transmission received, maybe a past life. You know what I mean? If we're
Yeah.
maybe because we're all kind of like a shared consciousness in the egg. We're all just individual um, experiences of this singular shared purpose and consciousness, and so maybe it's at that point, and maybe it's a past life of that it's not like it's a past life that like I could have experienced. It's like one of the past lives that this shared collective
Yeah.
energy source has experienced.
And,
That's pretty
I,
neat.
personally, I only recall having that dream as a child about being shot. It's not something I've experienced, I don't think, since then. What I can say is I've had numerous dreams throughout my life about tidal waves. And I'm not talking like even the one in Indonesia, as horrific as that was. Like, these dreams are like the cataclysmic asteroid impact 1,000-foot tall waves. And I've had these dreams since before we had the CGI to produce that on film. Like,
Like Interstellar, like that scene in
yeah,
Interstellar.
I
Those
know.
mountains, those aren't
Yeah,
mountains.
I've had that dream since before I had a visual
Wow.
reference to pull that from.
Wow.
But I know there's been 1,000-foot waves on this earth in the past, probably witnessed
Yeah.
by some distant ancestor somehow. Is that just in there? Is that just in your brain? And at night, your brain just lets it out.
That's cool. I like that. Yeah, my 2 cents on the question, Bob, I think would be that I think there's uh I think there's like other questions that are even more compelling, meaning like so you said, why do we dream? And I think it's like there's probably not an objective answer, right? Like, why do you dream? Why do I dream? Why does that person dream? Right? Everybody probably has their own unique subjective, experience of why they dream that, you know, through conversation, then we can see like, oh, you also do this. Oh, that's cool. Like there's some, similarities and coincidences. Those are cool. But I don't know that there's like, for me, I guess, I'm less interested in like the singular objective biological, this is why we all dream. That just doesn't seem as interesting to me as like hearing these individual things like Tucker just said. He has memories of having dreams of 1,000-foot tall waves before he had a reference for it. Like, wow, like that's so cool. And so like what I lean towards maybe is like one of the reasons we all might dream, and some people maybe have this experience more than others or whatever, but I think it's like an opportunity for the brain to like be creative and play and like test the, push the envelope, on like thoughts and, like um Tucker, you were talking about uh Rolling Stones, Keith Richards, but Bob, I heard you say, and I know for sure I've heard this story many times, that the melody for Yesterday was something that Paul McCartney dreamt, woke up and had the melody but didn't have the words, and it famously he just wrote down scrambled eggs because 1 2 3 scrambled eggs, right? Like that to me like makes a lot of sense, that like that could be a reason why some people dream, is so the brain can have a chance to really just like play, you know what I mean? Like have that experience free from sensory constraints. Remember that was like one of the ways that they kind of framed up dreaming is like being alive but without sensory constraints. So that's how I would answer that. What about you, Bob? Like, what do you think?
I think that it is common, meaning like commonly shared as not just humans, like, dogs sleep. If you ever watch a dog dreaming, you'll see like, sometimes his little paws are kind of twitching and it seems like he's like wants to go, woof, woof, woof. Like sometimes he's
Yeah.
like growling like, like I had a
Right.
lab when I was a kid, the sweetest dog, and she never growled except in her dreams. It was weird because I would spend time with her. She'd be deep asleep and I'd be petting her or whatever. She'd be just deeply asleep next to me for hours and hours. And every once in a while, you could tell, like, she's probably chasing a squirrel here, like a little face would twitch. Like her face would twitch, like her little eyes and like her eyebrows and stuff. And dogs, when they fall deep, deep asleep, you can kind of like touch them and they don't even know you're there. Like they're totally out, like super deep. And then every once in a while she would growl, which was so out of the character, out of the norm for this lab. Anyway, totally off the topic. I don't know why I told that story, but here's what I think. I think that we brought up prompt engineering in the past, and I think that's right in line with what my concept is, that it's like AI. So AI is this thing you have to give it a prompt, and then it's going to give you something back. And then in the development of AI, so before it becomes like ChatGPT, you have a human reinforcement learning section. So you would feed in some kind of an input in the neural net, it would give out an output, and a human would say, no, that's not right. Are you guys familiar? Does it sound right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you would have the beginning, this beginning of a training set. So you're trying to train, you put in like a bunch of images of cat. So first of all, there are these random images that some human being labels with the word cat. Computer doesn't know what cat means. Computer has no understanding.
Right.
You're just putting in a label to a thing, and then they break the thing into pixels, and then they put a number on each pixel, and it just becomes a giant math problem, is my point.
Yeah.
But what you're doing is you're reinforcing a neural net. So it's like you have this model with all these little dials on it. And so if someone puts the mathematical equivalent of a picture of a cat into the input side, it goes through all these little dials, and each one is weighted just so. And the output, and the computer doesn't know what this means, but the output is a cat. And it tells you, yes, this is a domestic short hair cat, whatever. It tells you what it is. So you can train a computer, an AI, to take a picture of a cat on the inside and it spits out the word cat. Or you could make a large language model and feed it a bunch of text. And if you prompt it with, tell me a joke, out of the training data set of how many times this character tell me a joke. It doesn't know what that means, by the way. Obviously, it doesn't know what tell me a joke means. But the mathematical equivalent of tell me a joke, when you put it in, it knows to spit out this thing. And this thing happens to be what we would call a joke.
Right.
But it only gets to that point through human reinforcement. Typically, I mean, there's like, self-play, and there's variations of how these things train themselves. But let's stick to human reinforcement machine learning. Okay, human reinforcement machine learning is what I'm talking about. So imagine you're asleep and your consciousness is offline, but your brain is trying to predict things. Okay, your brain is about, how do I predict what comes next? A predictive model, if you will. And so your brain is now cooking to, how do I get a better predictive model? Well, it can create, or it can synthesize different scenarios. Okay, it's like you're watching a video. Okay, say the video is 30 seconds long, and you play the first 25 seconds, and then what's the last 5 seconds? What's happening here? Well, there's variations. I mean, you might not get it right, but you can do this thing, right? You can make some sort of a concept of, I've watched 25 seconds of the movie. What happens in the next 5 seconds? And so your brain is trying to do that. And it can do this all day long because that's what your brain does. It processes the signal from the outside world, and it creates a hallucination or a model of this thing. And then your consciousness, your awareness lives in this thing. And so your consciousness is there, in my opinion, in order to provide the human reinforcement, the feedback of, that was not right or that was right. So what's so fascinating is you both had these recent dreams about, in a hotel room, you're dreaming about being in a hotel room.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of exactly what I'm talking about, meaning something novel is happening in your brain now is trying to figure out, can I model this thing? Can I predict what happens next? And so in Tucker's example, once he becomes aware that, hey, you couldn't have gotten in, the door is chained on the inside, she's like, oh, my bad. And then boom, you're gone. And then John's is like, he's predicting, like, what happens if I don't go into my room, but someone else's? Well, maybe they're just really cool people and they're just like, just hang out on the couch and, whatever.
Yeah.
Like, so my point is,
Yeah.
like, your brain has no causation understanding. There's no level of understanding. This happens after that because of this principle. All it knows, in my opinion, on the subconscious level is correlation.
Yeah.
If this, then that. And it's not because it's caused by that. It's not connected by that. It's literally like a mathematical equation of tell me a joke, but it doesn't know this is English. It's broken into, a mathematical formula. And then we scour a giant matrix of how many times were those characters used in that order. And then what's the most likely response, one token at a time.
Right.
So that's what I think that the dream state is the proof in the pudding that our consciousness is not driving. Our consciousness is riding, but we're riding for a very important purpose, which is to update the weights of our model.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, think about it with the example of your dog. Your dog had never been put in a situation in real life where it felt threatened enough to need to growl.
Totally.
But in its dream state, it had enough instinctual knowledge to know how to react to a threat.
Yeah, if someone had ever broken
Subconsciously.
by the way, if someone had ever broken in my house, I hope that there's like real broken in, like not just like knocking on the door. She would bark if you knocked on the door, but then she would lick you if you come in. But imagine if like someone comes in with violence.
Yeah.
And just to Tucker's point, like it never happened in her life. But we all know it's inside, every dog that if you kick the dog, it's going to bite you back or whatever, like something horrible happens, this thing will react. I think you're exactly right. That it was inside her somewhere that, this is a descendant of wolves or whatever you want to call this thing. I mean, she was a black lab. You couldn't get more friendly, but in a scenario that she had never experienced in reality, she did have the capacity to growl.
Yeah. And like everything we always talk about, I think if we ever had the solid, concrete evidence of this is why the brain dreams, there would be a spectrum of things happening. I think they'd be able to break it down into different types of dreams happening for different reasons. There could be some where it is your brain doing a memory dump, getting rid of all the useless stuff that it doesn't need to store. And you have these wacky dreams that don't have any real storyline or rational flow or real meaning. And then I think
you come up with the melody for yesterday during your dream,
exactly.
So that's what it was for, right?
And then there's the type of dreams like your dog or the tidal wave where it's like there's something in your DNA that says this has happened in the past, and if it does, this is how you should react.
What about this? This is interesting parallel to this, Tucker, which I haven't figured out yet, but I think is in line to diagnose this situation. Do you guys remember in the podcast where Eagleman says people with dementia would have bland dreams?
I don't remember that. I guess I forgot.
Bland, I think even beyond dementia, as you age.
Thank you, Tucker.
And you become more elderly, your dreams become more boring and less.
Yeah, you're just sitting at the diner drinking a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
You're just looking at the newspaper, nothing's going on, just nice. Blue jay lands on the windowsill, blah, blah, blah. But that made me think, like, there is function here, and I agree. By the way, spectrum. I think there's definitely more than one answer. I don't think it's just hard and fast one way or another. I 100% agree. But if let's assume that there's a lot of energy and there's a huge evolutionary investment to this process throughout mammals, at least, probably many different creatures. That there's probably a reason for this thing. I mean, it's probably not for no reason at all. It's not just for fun. So it would make sense, though, to diagnose that as you're nearing the end of your life, or if you're having cognitive issues, this once vivid, exciting, scary, heart-racingly evocative thing that happens, we're asleep 1/3 of our life, let's say, this thing starts to kind of take a turn, kind of wind down, or I don't know. It just doesn't have as much, like, I don't know. It doesn't. What's the purpose? I don't know. I mean, it goes back to this weirdness of, you're not in control, but it's your brain. You don't know it's not real, but it's obviously inside your head. I mean, it's just such a self-contained situation that it doesn't seem like, if it has any play on why wouldn't you have like just the most awesome dreams as you get older? Like, why wouldn't you just have, you have all these memories now, you have all these, why wouldn't you just go back to like the coolest thing that ever happened, or the most peaceful time of your life, or this loved one who passed away, you get to revisit them and it feels real. Like, there's so many ways this thing could play out that it would be, fun is probably not the right word, but it would be just pleasurable. Like, why doesn't your brain just be like, you know what, motherfucker? I'm going to give you the good stuff.
Yeah,
I'm going to give you all what you ever
Enjoy.
wanted. Yeah, enjoy this, man. Just enjoy this time, right? There's no harm.
Yeah.
We're not wasting anybody's time. You got to sleep. Why don't I just give you roses all day long? I don't know. That's kind of why I think it's like a feedback mechanism. Like, here's my point. I think there's an actual point to the thing. If there wasn't a point to the thing, you would just get to be a race car driver or a jet pilot or, rock star every fucking night. Every night you just get to be like whatever. Or maybe it's terrifying you. Maybe it's not about, maybe it's like recurring 1,000-foot waves and falling into a volcano or going down in a plane or something. Like, I could understand that. But to have it be, as I get old, I'm just drinking a cup of coffee here on the porch. I don't know.
Because that's your brain's ancestral memories preparing you for what you're likely to encounter in that phase of your life.
Maybe so.
Yeah, maybe so, right?
I don't know. Brain's fascinating.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple more things I definitely wanted to make sure we talked about. The Picasso quote, obviously, but before we get to that, there was this concept about suspension of disbelief that he mentions. Our brains accept whatever reality we're presented with. He mentions hallucinations. Again, just that word means so much more to me since we started talking about all this stuff, and Anil Seth described, reality as controlled hallucination. We all agree on the same thing, that we call it reality, but we're all hallucinating all the time. But Eagleman also mentions like schizophrenia. But the interesting thing here was that this notion that suspension of disbelief, I'm going to suspend my disbelief about this. He's like, that's kind of the wrong idea. By the way, I can't remember for sure actually if it was David Eagleman or the guy he was interviewing, but that suspension of disbelief is kind of the wrong idea, because belief is the default. Like, the brain is kind of wired to believe whatever reality we're presented with. So it's more like we would be suspending our belief than suspending our disbelief over something. It reminded me of sort of the counterintuitiveness of the scientific method, and this came up in one of Veritasium's videos about cognitive bias, where he makes this point at the end that the point of the scientific method is to disprove the hypothesis. It's not to find the evidence for your hypothesis to be true.
How to falsify it.
Yeah, because that's, that then you risk this cognitive bias. Well, I think it's this. Let me just find all the things that like back that up and seem to prove this. Like that's not as helpful as trying to disprove it, because the more you can disprove the hypothesis and the next hypothesis, and the more you can disprove your hypothesis, the closer you get to what is probably real,
Well, science is considered, a scientific hypothesis is one that is falsifiable. Like if you have a hypothesis that's not even like the many worlds, the many worlds interpretation, right? Like there's just many universes that happened during the Big Bang era, and we have our specific laws of physics because we were one of an infinite number of universes that were all created simultaneously. Well, that's great, but how do you falsify that? So it's not even inherent in the theory itself or the hypothesis itself to be able to be falsifiable. So I think that's what they're trying to do initially, is constrain your hypothesis to things that are at least potentially falsifiable. So if you can't even conceive of a way to falsify something, then it's not worth exploring in a scientific way to quote unquote prove it. Because so you proved it, but how do you potentially falsify it? Well, there is no way, because it's Big Bang and many universes, and there you go, we're stuck.
Well, here's another thing I find fascinating about dreams, and I don't know if you've experienced it, but there's enough entertainment trope that I think everybody will have some idea of this. But you have a dream that in your dream your partner did something, and you wake up upset with them because of what they did in your dream. Now, what's fascinating to me is you could have a dream where you did that thing to your partner, but you don't wake up upset with yourself for doing that.
Interesting.
And I think it's because the way our brain works is we're instantly able to justify what we did in that dream by saying, I would never do that. But you wake up upset with your partner because
how dare they did that?
How dare they did that?
Or the worst case is you tell your partner about your dream, and they judge your reaction or your dream state as if that's something real.
As if you had any control over it whatsoever.
Yeah. I think Eagleman does touch on this, by the way, Tucker, about I think he said he had a dream about his brother's wedding and something happened with his new sister-in-law or something, but it never really happened. But he had some kind of weird, feeling.
Yeah.
That was
fucked with his head.
Yeah.
Well, it's convincing, meaning the feeling that you feel in that moment is as if it's real, right? So that's something that how do you know what's real then and what's not? It feels identical, it looks identical. And if you're convinced in the moment, you really are feeling that thing, is my point. Like loss of a loved one or someone cheating on
you.
Or killing somebody or being back to John, waking up angry.
Right.
Like, I think that's real anger. That's not a fake anger. It's not a hallucination anger. And so for people with schizophrenia, where you're walking in a waking dream, unable to determine what is the hallucination and what is the quote unquote reality, that's a terrifying place to be in, because you realize then, the free will component of just pay attention to what's real. Forget all the stuff that's fake. Well, not so fast. Not so fast. When it all bleeds together, it's so convincing in the fact that your brain is creating everything you perceive, not just the quote unquote hallucination side, but literally everything is a fabrication. Everything.
Yeah.
And it's convincingly so, like convincingly real or whatever. And I don't think the human consciousness is able to make a judgment call and just dismiss the hallucination of voices or visions or whatever. And that's a very real condition, that people have to unfortunately deal with.
Yeah. I think this actually ties really nicely into the Picasso quote, and I had an idea that I want to try. But before we do that, I'll just quickly say back to the notion of telling your partner, your dream, and then they kind of common theme in the movie Dream Scenario. So just another plug for that movie, Dream Scenario. Highly recommend it. But yeah, okay. So this Picasso quote, we all. So I'm going to read the quote, and then I'm going to suggest. I'm going to try this thing that I think might be fun. But here's the quote. We all know that art is not truth. Art is a lie that makes us realize truth, at least the truth that is given to us to understand. The artist must know the manner whereby to convince others of the truthfulness of his lies. And what I was thinking is like, let me read that quote, but instead of using art, I'm going to use either the brain or dreams, and I bet this will be fun. You know what I mean? So like,
Yeah, do that.
we all know that dreams are not truth. Dreams are a lie that make us realize truth, at least the truth that is given to us to understand. The brain must know the manner whereby to convince the dreamer of the truthfulness of those lies.
That's
So
beautiful.
I don't know
That's
if I
nicely
is that I don't know if I should feel like good about like bastardizing Picasso's quote.
No, that's a
but
really
it
cool
kind of
smash
it seemed
up.
kind of fun. It kind of seemed like a fun
It's
because
like two random songs that are smashed together, right? And then it's just like, wow, that actually works. That
yeah.
definitely plays.
And I love that quote because my wife and I went to the Denver Art Museum yesterday, and there's fabulous, fabulous art there, right? And then we go up into like the contemporary art section, and there was this painting, and it was probably 6 foot by 6 foot, and it was titled The Sea. And on this white canvas were random blocks of color. And they were like reds and oranges and greens and bright colors. There was not a damn thing about that painting that would make you think of the ocean. Like it had no, it didn't even look like anything. And to the point it kind of pissed me off a little bit because like the artist is supposed to make you believe the truth in their lie, right? Where if that dude would have just been like walked up to you and said, "Picture the ocean," it would have been much more convincing than what he put on that canvas trying to make me picture the ocean.
Maybe the
So
point of the art though is to push your buttons.
Well, it
well
worked.
well yeah, I was gonna say it sounds like it did because like there's a couple things because I think, and this is just me being like particular about words, but I think you said the name of the piece was The Sea, but in your description you said that nothing would make you, and I think you were saying collectively like the royal you or whatever, that would
Yeah,
make you a person think of the ocean, but it's called the sea.
yeah,
And and your experience, I mean, you know, please take this with like the um kindness I'm intending, but like, that was your experience. Like it didn't make you think of the ocean, right? So but think about that, like somebody, some in some happenstance, maybe they're stumbling through kind of like on a drunken stupor, maybe they're on mushrooms, I don't know, somebody somewhere somehow will look at that, maybe they'll see it first and then they'll look, this piece is called The Sea, and something will click and they'll be like, dude, it's totally the sea. These colors
What
are
if
like
what if it's a
the coral reef in the sea or something. You know what I mean?
but
Like
what if it's
it's
a
a
John,
play on the word?
representation of like
What
all
if
the
it's
species, you know what I mean, that are in the sea, right? I
if
mean,
I
like
was
who knows, right?
retired, if I was retired and had nothing better to do with my time, I would go stand in front of the description of that painting and ask people what they saw. And the
Yeah.
first person who said the sea, I'd go, "You're wrong."
what if it's a
Uh,
play on words though of sea?
Uh,
What if it's a play on words of sea?
yeah, like
yeah,
because
could
because
be
I assume, based on the way you said the ocean, so the sea, I assume it was spelled SEA.
correct.
But yeah,
But what
like
if it's a play on
listen
that?
to that sound of that word, sea.
Yeah.
You could ask somebody like, spell C, and they might say SEE. They might be, you mean the letter C? You know what I mean? Like, you mean Spanish for yes? I mean, like, you know what I'm saying? The C. Okay, so like it's objectively written, the C, and maybe, but no, I love it, Bob. Like, what if okay, well, I had to.
Point is
It's called
what
the
you see.
sea.
Yeah, what
Yeah.
do you see? Yeah, what do you see? Because
Yeah.
I think it's.
You
But
know.
back to you, John, being specific with the words. I didn't think of that when he said ocean.
Mm.
When he said it's the ocean, I didn't conceptualize what immediately I thought of when you said, "But isn't it called the sea?"
Yeah.
And then like, oh, he's fucking with you, meaning the artist is definitely fucking with you.
He's fucking with you.
But if I
Yeah.
may take a stab at the Picasso
Yeah. Yeah.
quote,
Please.
which I would literally write. I mean, I don't think you can copyright it, but I would literally rewrite it the way you said it, John. I would literally go back and rewrite that and compose that somehow, document that somehow.
I'll put it in the show notes of the podcast about
Thank you.
that.
I think it's a more no, because I think it's a it it restates what was said in a it restates something very profound, which is what I think is happening when we share the tension between a metaphor and a dream. Okay, so the dream, you don't understand it's a lie because you're hallucinating this thing and it seems like it's real, and you fall into it so easily. Your consciousness falls into this thing, into its own subconsciousness, but it's a lie, meaning it's not meant to give the consciousness the understanding that a metaphor is. A metaphor is also a lie, but it's not really, because we both know it's a lie. So we discount the fact that it's a lie and we just look for the underlying comparison. You guys track?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so I think the art is the bridge where a human gives you the sea, right? Lying to you. But you know it's a fucking lie. Tucker knows it's a lie. So how is it a lie? Yeah, fucking liars. But he knows there's something there, is my point. You're not just walking by the thing. Like I've gone by fields of cows so many times that are not looking up at the mountains. They're not looking at the rainbows. They're not gazing at the beautifulness that surrounds them. But I do, and I wonder, and I feel beauty and awe. And so my point is, like, there's a layer of this thing where if it's just all literal, like the dream feels literal, it feels literal, but it is built symbolically. It's created, I assume, if not random. There's some purpose to the scenario being given to you to fall into. But a work of art would presumably, maybe not, well, the literal, like, photorealistic drawings or something are skill-based art, right? Something that's just like human excellence in being able to do a pencil drawing of something that looks exactly like the real thing. That's something there. That is definitely art. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But we're talking about a metaphor, something that is a lie in order to get you to see the truth. And we know that this thing is an abstraction. We don't take a handful of flowers out of a vase of a painting. We know it's not real. We're looking at a two-dimensional representation of what somebody else saw through their eyes. And there might be something there then that is in that abstraction layer that is truth, that is more than the sum of the lie that this thing is the other thing, because they're not. This thing is not the other. You are not eagle-eyed, John. You do not have eagle eyes. But you know what? You have really great vision, just like an eagle does. So as long as you, by the way, that triggers a memory real quick, guys. Trying to remember what it was now. Dang it. There was something. Oh, I know what it was. Jumping the shark. Do you guys are familiar with Jumping the Shark?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so for everybody who doesn't know, Happy Days. This was show from the 70s, 80s, something like that. And the Fonz is the main character, or one of the main characters. And in the later, maybe the last season, I can't remember, one of the later ones.
Dude, I think it went on like 6 more seasons after, because I just listened to The Boys. It's the Boys, but it's the audiobook of Ron and Clint Howard. It's fantastic, by the way. Like, but yeah, so he talks about this.
There's a turning point. This isn't my point, but just for everybody to be on the same page, there's a turning point in the scripting of this show. That's a what would you call it? Just a comedy, just a
sitcom.
Sitcom. Thank
Basically.
you. That's
Yeah.
exactly what I'm talking about. Sitcom. So we have situation comedy, and they've run out of all the ideas. They've gone to Hawaii. They've done all kinds of crazy stuff. And finally, they have Arthur Fonzarelli water skiing, and he jumps over a shark, and for some reason, I don't even remember why. But here's my point. This is what the metaphor is. When you have a metaphor, you have to have this shared experience. So if you've never seen Happy Days, if I just said jump the shark, you can't logically determine what the meaning is. There's no logical interpretation of jumping the shark, right?
And
It's a lie.
The funny thing is, I knew what the metaphor meant, but I didn't know that's where it came from.
Interesting.
That is so interesting too, because I could be misremembering, but I'm pretty sure that the meaning of that metaphor, came about after. It truly wasn't that they were out of ideas. It truly wasn't that they were like, oh man, what are we gonna do? Let's have him water ski and jump over a shark. Like Henry Winkler could water ski. Like that was something I hope I'm not misremembering this. That it actually was like worked in as like, this isn't like because we can't think of any other ideas. They did it because it was like something they wanted to do. And then after the fact, that's the story that's told. Is it's like, because that's the metaphor, is like there's nothing else. What else? Oh, they jumped the shark. That's what's interesting to me. And Tucker, you said you knew what that meant before you knew where it came from. So this came into the zeitgeist, right? I mean, this was something that,
because of context, Tucker. Because if I were to just say, if you were in a room and you have a piece of paper and I wrote and you don't understand the context, I just write jump the shark. Tell me what that means.
Oh, I would have no idea.
That's my point.
I only know because I heard it used in context.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And to your point, John, it wasn't done on purpose. It was just culturally
a narration after the fact.
After the fact, people grab this as an example of, this is what we're going to use as a metaphor for something that's outside the realm of logic and what is normal, and they've gone off the rails, right? All these other metaphors, by the way, we constantly speak of metaphors. So if you don't know what rails are, how would you know what off the rails mean? If you've never seen a train before, if you're in the Amazon and you have no idea what these words. So this goes back to the power of art and metaphor, and truth and lies, in that we can take one thing, jumping the shark, which has no literal meaning. Like, these words are just, I mean, you might know what jump means, you might know what shark means, but there's no reference that jumping a shark makes any sense at all. Right, because you don't jump in the water. Like, you'd have to infer that you're skiing over a ramp, is my point. Water skiing over a ramp, you have to understand there's a motorboat pulling you and all the rest, and there's a shark and whatever. So the beauty is that we can compress and encrypt. So we're encrypting this information. So you have to have a shared understanding of the situation, or contextualized shared understanding. At least you have to understand, okay, what is going on here? And then compressing this giant idea that we could talk for hours upon, this phenomenon of a show or an idea losing its direction and scrambling for straws or whatever, right? Like grasping for straws. So the point is, metaphor and art is a compression and encryption mechanism. Dreams are doing the same thing, but you don't know it's a lie. So it feels real to you. I think that's my take-home message, is the art, you are standing in front of the thing, you're in a gallery, you went there on purpose, you paid your money, there's a crowd, people are murmuring and talking and pointing, taking pictures, everybody is playing the game. Whereas in your dream, you're on your bed, you lay your head down, you put your phone down, you take your glasses off, whatever, you close your eyes, and all of a sudden you wake up in, Yankee Stadium, and you're on the mound, and it's, game 7, 9th inning, bases are low, right? You're in this fucking fantastical scenario, and now I got the ball in my hand and I can feel it, and I can hear the crowd roar, and I smell the popcorn and the beer, and I feel my foot on the rubber, and I got the glove in my. It's real, dudes. It's real. But it's a lie. That's
right.
That's the beauty is what is happening then in that moment. If it's not just an experience of fantasy or whatever, if there is something there, a truth underneath the lie, that's what I think is powerful with the potential for dreams. Whether it's true or not, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, all the more reasons to keep studying it, keep researching it, keep, especially the lucid dreaming stuff, manipulating this state, consciously, yeah, let's keep figuring out where that goes,
100%.
you know. I'm doing a time check here, so the other thing that I put in the agenda this week, I don't know that we can fully go a whole nother 90 minutes on this one thing, but it's probably more than I want to try to squeeze in at the end here. But I rewatched The Abyss this week, and I know you've had a lot to say about that in the past, Bob. Tucker, you remember this movie from, it's like 1989.
Ed
yeah.
Harris.
James, yeah,
What's her name?
Mary Elizabeth Master Antonio, I think.
Thank
Yeah,
you, Mary Elizabeth Antonio. Yes.
yeah. What if we plan for next episode to at least start with what I think is sort of an interesting tie-in, or at least questions, and either continue the sleep thing, or if we think it could be one of those like transition type episodes where we end up talking about the amazingness of that movie.
Well, there's also, John, I just with reflecting on our notes from way back in the day, like we have a list of probably a dozen movies to just kind of extract some beauty from and
Totally.
discuss metaphorical truth. So I don't know if
Yeah.
we could make maybe 3 movies or something. That could be one. And I don't know if we all have watched all of these movies, but there's, I think True Grit was another one that I don't know if you gentlemen have seen this yet, either the original or the remake.
I know I
I
saw the
haven't.
original, but it's
Yeah, I
been
haven't
many
seen either.
years.
I know I've heard good things, so yeah.
There's other couple movies on there I can't recall, but we do have a list. I think we have like
Yeah.
10 long lists. We could grab a couple that are shared movies.
Yeah. Well, just because, yeah, if that's cool with you guys, just because we weren't for sure what we were going to do after we wrap up the sleep thing. But
Well, can
what
you
if we?
tease what you have from the Abyss
I
that has to do
was,
with sleep?
yeah, okay, yeah,
Dream?
and again, like it's probably like a loose tie-in, but I was curious about what we think the state of consciousness was in the two scene. There's two scenes. It's in the last 45 minutes of the movie, which I think are like the best 45 minutes of the movie. It's so good. The ending of it, it's so good when it takes off. Like,
And who's the
but anyway,
director? Cameron? I'm trying to remember who's the director.
yeah. James Cameron, like, wrote and directed, I believe. But the two scenes is when Mary Elizabeth Master Antonio's character freezes to death, and then the other one is when Ed Harris's character breathes the breathable water. Like, I was just curious, like, do you think they were dreaming, in these, like, were these maybe altered states of consciousness that were similar to being asleep, similar to dreaming? So that was kind of the launching point. Where could this go in the context of sleep and dreams? So again, I think it's probably too much to try to wrap up now. I don't know that we could go 90 minutes specifically about that, but maybe we start with that next time and then just keep talking about how cool the movie is, and or one or two if we want to bring one or two other movies into it.
Definitely, and I'm very deeply enamored with what I consider the symbolic nature with consciousness and subconsciousness. And
Yeah.
I know I see, it's like I get it. I see everything this way. I apologize to everybody, but
No, you don't got to apologize. I'm seeing it too, man. Since we've been talking, like, I start to see it everywhere. Also,
and
it's really cool.
Here's the list. I just grabbed it up. Here's the list that I've got that we could talk about: The Truman Show, Usual Suspects, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. That's a big one for me. Moby Dick, a big one. Matrix, of course. Barbie.
Yeah, the Barbie movie, you guys.
But John, you put that one in. True
I
Grit,
did.
The new one, Tron, and then War Games. I don't know if you remember that, Matthew Broderick from way back in the day.
Sure. Actually, yeah, throw the Cable Guy on there too, man.
Good point.
Anyway, yeah. So yeah, what if we plan to do that? Just kind of, at least for sure, The Abyss, and maybe like one or two other movies that kind of tie in with this.
Dream idea.
Yeah, either sleep, consciousness, kind of this what is real. I mean, yeah, we can narrow it down. I mean, all of a sudden I'm like, Oh, this is going to be multi-part, but maybe we can try to focus on one or two specific
We'll
things.
figure it out through the week.
Yeah. Yeah.
Love it.
Right on. Okay, cool. Well, yeah. So let's wrap this up. Yeah, thank you guys as always. If you're listening, thank you. Please let us know if you have any thoughts, ideas for other shows, disagreements even. Love to hear other points of view on some of these things. So sendingpoets@gmail.com is the best way to get to us. So until next week. I don't think I shared this quote. It was a Walt Whitman quote. I think I was planning to share it last time, and then it made more sense to share the Picasso quote. So I don't believe this is a repeat. If it is, I apologize. But I liked this one from Walt Whitman. It goes, "I dream in my dream all the dreams of the other dreamers, and I become the other dreamers."